on wisdom, conditions and promises of wisdom. And I thought, since we looked at wisdom last week and talked about some things why we need wisdom, I thought we'd go ahead with this and just kind of set it in our minds to understand the very importance of wisdom. Solomon writes, starting in verse 1 of Proverbs chapter 2, "My son, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments with you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding, yes, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and search for it as hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity, guarding the paths of justice and watching over the ways of his saints." And then, of course, last week we talked about, then you will understand righteousness and justice and equity and every good path. So when Solomon is talking about wisdom, of course, it's by inspiration of the Holy Spirit. God is wise. God knows everything that is knowable, which means he also knows which are the best decisions that we can make, the best choices that we can make, and anything that we are going to be doing in our lives. So that's the value of wisdom here, the importance of wisdom. And the one thing we want to point out, I want to point out as I begin, that verse 6, the Lord gives wisdom. It's a gift. It's a gift that can be acquired by anyone, because it's a gift that has to be developed. It's not a gift where God just poof throws it on us and there it is. We have to learn all through our lives this wisdom that God teaches. And God will put us in situations and help us to find the right way to get through the situation so it works out best for us and for his kingdom and for all those people around us. Amen. But when we look at wisdom, I think there are 5 conditions whereby wisdom becomes more available to us. And we talked this morning about making sure that we put ourselves in a right position to be able to ask God for things. So we've got to eliminate some things, but if we want wisdom, and we know James says that we have to pray for it, and God will give it to us liberally. He'll give us, as long as we're searching for it, striving for it, seeking out his way, he's going to give us that wisdom. But there are conditions that we have to put forth in order to have this wisdom in our lives and for it to grow. Now, look, verse 1. And notice I'm going to point out some action words. And they're action in the sense of doing something. Now, Solomon says, "My son, if you receive my words." We have to receive his words. And that may seem passive in the sense that they're coming to us, but it's an action that we have to do. We have to make ourselves receptive to what God is saying, open to his ways. And remember, the world is competing for us. The world is competing for us in the sense of the world belonging to Satan. And there are a lot of things in this world, Satan just doesn't have to directly control it. There are just things out here naturally that kind of, that tempt us and confuse us, confound us. So we're looking for ways to deal with all of these things. But if we're not willing to receive God's words, then we're never going to understand the right and proper way of doing things. But when we receive those words, then we have to treasure up his commandments. Treasure them up. The Have you ever looked on a thesaurus? You know what a thesaurus is?
Oh, yes.
It's a book of words, and it tells you the words, and it tells you what all the words kind of mean, like a dictionary, but it gives you all the synonyms and such of the words and how it's used. And see, even in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, okay, when we come together upon the first day of the week, we're supposed to give as we have purposed in our hearts. Well, where do you give it? Well, the word thesaurus basically is in there, in the treasury. You set it aside in the treasury. And that was for the special collection that was being taken up, so that there'd be no collections when Paul and whoever came with him to receive that collection. So that seems like that's good advice for us, you know, as we do it on the first day of every week. I think Paul was just saying, well, just do it like you do the others, just every week. Put that little bit aside that you've chosen for this particular work. But the treasure up the commandments, treasure them up within you. And we have to get them into our minds. We have to get them into our hearts. But again, that's an action word. What is our treasure? What do we really want out of life? I was told a long time ago, and it's true to a large degree, that philosophy is a blind man in a dark room looking for a black cat that isn't there.
That'll work.
Yeah. It's just whatever you want it to be until you come in with God and God's wisdom, and that changes philosophy. That changes it to something that is very real and achievable, understandable. Now you're able to put everything together because you've treasured it in your hearts. We all ought to be lovers of wisdom to a degree. Now, aside from that, see, you have the sophists out there, the sophists who just, they'll argue anything. They argue just to argue. All right, and I remember in school, college, that when we would talk about certain things, we'd have to debate. The students would pick a side and debate. And sometimes we had to debate on the side that we knew we didn't really believe. It's hard to debate something for something that you don't believe. But there are people out here called sophists, and that's basically what they do. They kind of put things off, you know, it really doesn't matter, but hey, let's argue, but they never come to any real conclusions. That's the one thing about God. God will give us conclusions in our life. He'll give us an end point because He tells us there's something even after death. We go on, so we better be preparing for it. Now, we can't see it, we can't smell it, touch it, taste it, you know, the empirical things that so many people use to determine truth, but we can know it's there because of God, and that makes how we debate, how we approach arguments with a different way of understanding it, because that's in our hearts and it's in our being, that we believe so much that we continue on through eternity. In verse 2, he tells us that, he says, making your ear attentive, and what he means is, make yourself listen. How many times have you talked to somebody and they're not listening to what you're saying, they're formulating an answer, not based on what you're saying, but you know, those old arguments or whatever, there it is. So there's no real communication taking part. We need to make our ears want to listen, desire to listen to God's Word. It just doesn't happen naturally. It's like watching Andy Griffith the other day. It's when the new girlfriend, who's the nurse, takes him out to a restaurant and wants him to eat snails. You know, it's a French restaurant, eat snails, you know, and he doesn't want to do it. Well, there's just some things in life that are a cultivated taste. It doesn't taste good the first couple times you eat it or drink it, so you got to keep going, and then you just get used to it. And they call that cultivating taste. No, it's like you're killing your taste buds so that you just don't notice it anymore. Make your ears attentive to wisdom. Are you listening for it? Are you trying to pick it up, even out in the world? Okay? And I really appreciate sometimes when the things that I say show up on these boards out here, but, signs. But remember, I'm getting them from somewhere. Because I'm keeping my ears open to listening for things that I can pass on. And I've got to differentiate, as I'm doing it. And that's the next one. See, incline your heart to understanding. Find the way to make a difference. Is this true? Is this not true? Does this make sense, or does this complicate things? When we're talking about God's salvation and God's rule over this world. Incline your heart to understanding God's word. That takes an effort. Incline means what? That's uphill, isn't it? You realize it's an uphill path. It takes a lot more energy to go uphill than it does downhill. Anybody can go downhill. Now that kind of reminds me of what Jesus said about entering at the straight gate and then walking the narrow way. It's a little bit harder than just going along with everybody at the wide gate and the broad way. It takes some effort to do it, but that effort that we put into it when we incline our ears to God's wisdom, it will be so profitable to us that we won't even know about the energy that we've expended and the resources that we've put toward gaining this kind of wisdom. Verse 3 says, yes, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding. What does it mean to call out and raise your voice? Friends, ask. Jesus talked about ask. Ask and it shall be given to you. Seek and you shall find. Knock and the door will be open to you. How many times do we really ask questions about things? Somebody tells us something, we either take it for granted or, we don't care. But if we really want to know and we want to understand something, we will ask questions. And sometimes, people will blow you off if you ask questions, because they don't want to try to explain something or to help you along the path. And we talked about before, and Danny's even mentioned that, that knowledge is power. If you know something somebody else doesn't know, that's a powerful thing. Well, we're supposed to be teachers. We're supposed to be helping people. We're not supposed to be hiding knowledge. We're supposed to be sharing knowledge to help to lift them up, because it's an incline, right? It's kind of uphill. But we got to call out for it. We got to ask for it. And sometimes we've got to pester people to get answers. And you may have to go to more than one or two people to find the answers. It's like the widow in, I want to say that it's in the book of Luke. The widow who keeps going, hey, judge, give me my judgment, avenge me of my adversary. And she just keeps doing it until finally he says, okay, I'm going to do it just to get rid of her. We need to be pests when it comes to learning about God's Word. And this wisdom that God can give us. We've got to be out there actively seeking it. And yeah, it may get on people's nerves, but you know something? If we ask people enough questions, if they have the right heart and they've made their ear attentive, maybe they're going to dig a little deeper and they'll find some more answers too, and it'll help everybody. But see, we've got to raise our voices. We've got to shout out. I want to know the truth. I want to understand. And that's why I appreciate so very much you allowing me to teach what I'm teaching on Sunday mornings about grace, because I've had to go back, I've had to look at more things than probably what I did in studying those things in college, and how to refute them, because, it's more important now. Because here, we got a group of people, our souls depend upon what we believe and how we live our lives. So, but ask questions. Verse 4. If you seek it like silver and search for it as for hidden treasures. You got a mine for it. I used to work in a coal mine. I think I've told you that before. Maybe I did, maybe I did, but I worked in a coal mine, go down underneath the ground, these big tunnels. Of course, there's machinery now, but you could imagine 150 years ago going down there with picks and shovels and picking and digging the coal. But not only that, but the silver and the gold. Think of the people in the early 1900s when gold was found in the Yukon. And how many people traveled up into the Yukon just for the hope of finding gold, because it was precious, it was valuable. If we don't consider wisdom precious and valuable, we're not going to be looking for it. We're not going to be mining for it. That's hard, dangerous work, and you got to take some risks if you want to seek this wisdom that God has there for us. Yes, He gives it to us, but we've got to go mine it out. Got to dig very deep and be careful. There's gold and silver in particular come in very small veins. Very seldom do people hit a mother lode. They're always looking for the mother lode, but it's usually just a little fine strip, winding a ribbon type deal through a mountain or whatever, or you find it in nuggets because it's been washed out into the streams. Even that's a lot of work, isn't it? But that's where it's at. And that's the way wisdom is. Yes, it's there, but we've got to put the effort in for it. So I think, how many conditions did we get there? Receive it, treasure it up, and make your ear attentive and incline your heart, call out for it and kind of mine for it, seek it like silver and precious things. So I think that's about 5 there. Verse 6, for the Lord gives wisdom. From His mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. See, now, we got to be upright. We've got to want to use it righteously in the way that He would have us to use it. But think of the things. He's going to store it up, but where's He going to store it up? He's not only going to store it up for the upright, He's going to store it up in the upright. In those who seek the righteousness of God, the righteousness of Jesus Christ. And when that happens, see, these are the promises. He stores it up in us, but He is a shield to those who walk in integrity. We hear a lot about integrity. I didn't know it. You know what FBI stands for?
Investigation.
No. Fidelity, bravery, integrity. And this is why so many are upset, because their integrity has been called into question because of the actions of a few. Right? It's about the ethics. How did they do this? How did they proceed? Did they do things the way they were supposed to? Yeah, it's the Federal Bureau of Investigation, but their motto is also FBI. Well, listen, that's the same for the church. See? We have to walk upright lives, but also walk in integrity. Integrity. How do you determine the integrity of steel? stress test, right? What does it take to break it? What does it get to take a steel beam to burst? And then that tells you kind of the integrity of that piece of metal. Well, that's with us. What would it take to get us to stop following Jesus? How much integrity do we have? How much stress can be put upon us before we finally say, okay, I give up, I'm going the devil's way? That's something for us to think about. And this wisdom will help us to understand it, see, that we can walk in integrity. Now, I've said before, if we'll take a step toward God, a man's step toward God, God will take a God step toward us. Get it right here in a moment. You think of that. He will be a shield to those who walk in integrity. If we start walking in integrity, He'll be a shield for us. He'll put that hedge around us so that we're not tempted with a whole lot of things. Okay? The shield, the buckler, I think is what it says in the King James Version, but that's it. Boy, how would you like the wisdom of God to go as a shield before you, just kind of like plowing the way so your life's going to be easier. That's one of the promises of God. And of the wisdom He gives. Verse 8, guarding the paths of justice. He guards our paths. As we walk in if we're a just people, just individuals, seeking justice, understanding what justice is, wanting to do the right thing, standing up for the right things, then He guards our way. It may cost us our lives here on this earth, but in the end, we have heaven to look forward to, and watching over the way of His saints. You know, we went through that class on angels and we talked about guardian angels. We don't need a guardian angel. We've got God watching over our ways. Now there's a lot of support network there, I'm sure, with it, but just to know that He cares for each and every one of us and watches over each and every one of us personally. That while the whole world is talking to God and He's listening to each and every one of them and watching over them, He's listening to me and watching over me at the very same time. What a wonderful, powerful, awesome God that we have.
Amen.
He's watching over the way of His saints. But look at verse 9. Then you will understand righteousness and justice and equity in every good path. When we set the conditions in our lives to receive the wisdom of God into our lives, then we're going to know and understand these things: righteousness, justice, and equity. What's the good path? You know, Jesus said, enter at the straight gate, right? Where is that? Where is that? How much probing do I have to do? How many wrong ways do I have to go down before I find the right way? It's not something we have to learn by experience. You know, I think if you read the book of Proverbs, you go through it, you learn one basic thing. The fool learns by experience. Now, he may not learn very much, but he learns by experience. And sometimes that experience is a tough experience, and that's what hell's going to be. A bad experience that the fool who never finds the right way has to experience for eternity to really understand there is a hell. Some people will not believe it until that happens. But see, the wise person learns not only from God's wisdom, learns a lot from watching the fool. Watching the person who makes mistakes, watching them destroy their life, and saying, I don't want to be like that. And that's part of that impetus that comes into the desire then to learn more about God's wisdom so that He'll watch over us. We see where the world is headed, don't we? We see that it's nihilistic. Not that nihilism is preferred philosophy, but it is nihilistic. And the way the world is set up, it's headed for destruction. But whose fault's that? Well, that's the world's fault. And that's Satan's fault, who's the god of this world. That's what he's called in the scriptures. We need to get to the God outside of this world, the one who created it. This world is in rebellion against God, and the more we see the things of the world, the more we should desire God's wisdom leading our lives. John chapter 6. Here, I forget which machine I'm working with. So, John chapter 6, verse 66. Isn't that kind of appropriate? I remember that the chapters and verse markings and all were added many centuries after the Bible was completed. Okay? Jesus, when he was walking on the earth, didn't have Matthew chapter 1, whatever, but just think about John 6:66, and then think of Revelation and 6:66. Okay? Look what this says. I think whoever did it must have known a relationship there. After this, many of his disciples, that's Jesus' disciples, turned back and no longer walked with him. All the time, see, as they're going, the testimony is there throughout. They marveled at his wisdom. They marveled at his power. They marveled at his authority. They marveled at all of these things. But he told them something that was hard to understand. Except you eat of my body and drink of my blood, you cannot be my disciple. And because that was too hard to understand, and because they were unwilling to say, Jesus, what do you mean by that? They said, this is too hard of a thing for us, and they walked away. That's pretty foolish, isn't it? Pretty foolish. So Jesus said to the 12, do you want to go away as well? Simon Peter answered him, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life, and we have believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God. That's where God's wisdom will lead us. To that knowledge that Jesus is the Holy One of God. He's the one that we need. And listen, in our lives, as long as we are walking with Jesus, we'll be seeking his wisdom. When we stop walking with Jesus, that means we've stopped to search for his wisdom. We don't really want it anymore. Because the more we gain, the more we understand that we need to get of God's wisdom. Thank you so very much for your time. I hope you get something out of it. I wish I'd have had that in the order that I wanted it, but I appreciate you all so much. Love you. God bless you. If you have a need, let your request be made known as we stand and sing the invitation.